Hi, I'm India.
I'm Ashton.
I'm Emma.
And I'm Rachel.
And we are the Gatekeepers. And today we're going to teach you guys about gait, what it is, how to improve it, how it changes over your lifespan, and how to get better at it when you get older. When we talk about our problem, we are talking about elderly patients or geriatric patients that do not know how to walk efficiently. Many elderly do not know how to walk correctly and therefore suffer from some form or lack of strength in their lower extremities, balance problems, flexibility inefficiencies with their range of motion, which can be in their hips or other joints that increase their efficiency walking, and their endurance. Whenever elderly or geriatric patients do not have the needs to have the correct walking or gait cycles, they can suffer from falls, trips, slips, and other disastrous consequences. When this happens, it not only affects their physical health, but their mental and emotional state. Not being able to be self-efficient is one of the biggest problems that faces the elderly population, and it all starts with being able to be self-efficient through walking and getting where you need to go.
What is gait? Human gait can be described as the movement of human limbs, a pattern of movement which can be broken down into phases, referred to as the gait cycle. The two main phases of the gait cycle are the weight-bearing or stance phase and the non-weight-bearing or swing phase. To begin, we will discuss the gait throughout the lifespan in a neuromotor context. The swing phase includes the time from which the left toe comes off the ground until the left heel comes back into contact with the ground. The stance phase is the opposite, in the time which the left heel contacts the ground to when the left toe comes back off the ground. The gait cycle also includes other factors, such as stride length, which describes the heel-to-heel contact on the same foot. Stride frequency refers to the number of strides you make per cycle. Opposing stride length and stride frequency, step length describes the heel-to-heel contact on the opposite foot, while step frequency refers to the number of steps you make per cycle. Some important factors needed for gait include dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. Dorsiflexion is when the angle between the shank and the foot decreases, compared to plantar flexion, when the angle between the shank and the foot increases. When walking, there is a continuous shift in the periods of double and single support. Double support is when both feet are in contact with the ground, and single support is when one foot is off the ground while the other is on the ground. These periods of double and single support can also be referred to as a functional kinetic chain. During locomotion, when one foot is in contact with the ground, this is an example of a closed kinetic chain motion. At the same time, when the other foot is swinging forward off the ground, that foot is described as an open kinetic chain motion. The combination of both open and closed chain motions make locomotion what is said to be a functional kinetic chain. Walking is just one example of many functional kinetic chains.
In human locomotion, several biomechanical factors can be observed. Kinematic factors include length of strides, difference between feet, height at which arms are held, and speed. Kinetic factors observed include the force of gravity, the frictional force, and the ground reaction force. Newton's third law of motion, the law of action-reaction, describes the fundamental principles behind the action and reaction forces during walking. The action force is what we normally think of when we think of the initially applied force. The reaction force is a simultaneous, equal but opposite counterforce, acting in the opposite direction to the action force. When walking, the reaction force will always be the oppositely directed force applied by the earth to the individual. The action force is initiated by an internal force, but the reaction force is external to the system. This gives the reaction force the opportunity capable of changing the motion of the center of gravity of the system. In a human, because our muscles are internal to the human system, reaction forces are always the major means of our locomotion. The force of gravity plays a major role in the locomotion and walking by keeping the individual on the surface of the earth. The gravitational force can be observed using the equation F equals mg, which accounts for the weight of the individual. Friction is another major player in locomotion. While we may not always think of friction as being present, it is there helping us walk, and we will notice if friction is not present. This would be evident if we were walking and we slipped on ice. It is much more difficult to walk across a patch of ice because without the friction force present, we would not be able to move from place to place. Whenever contact is made between the foot and the ground, a part of the total applied force will act downward on the ground and upward on the walking system. This is called the normal force. Normal force is usually defined as the force that presses the two surfaces together, in the case of walking, the foot and the ground. This normal force is what is responsible for the center of gravity of the system that becomes elevated for some time during locomotion. Whenever the normal force is met with an equal and opposite force from Earth, this is referred to as the ground reaction force. Friction helps us to not slip backward on a contacting surface and also provides the reaction force that will lead to locomotion. Other biomechanical elements of human locomotion include degrees of freedom, which affects the person's range of motion and energy transfer. Nikolai Bernstein, a Russian physiologist and biomechanist, proposed that the central nervous system may simplify a skill by freezing the degrees of freedom, which will in turn simplify the skill for beginners. Development of walking patterns from beginning to mature provides evidence which supports Bernstein's theory that humans learn their basic motor skills by decreasing the degrees of freedom during beginning attempts, and then freeing up the additional degrees of freedom as they become more efficient in their patterns of movement.
Throughout the lifespan, the pattern of locomotion changes. A bell curve can be observed since locomotion reaches its peak or greatest performance level from adolescence through middle adulthood. During infancy, gait patterns prove to be very difficult. To attempt to walk, infants keep their arms held in high guard position, widen their stance to increase their base of support, shorten their steps, exhibit flat footsteps, and have little hip rotation and minimal knee flexion. The human body restricts its degrees of freedom to simplify the movement. Children aged, they lower their arms and swing their legs in opposition to one another. Children start to exhibit a narrow stance, longer steps, heel than toe footfalls, and greater hip rotation. Children allow more degrees of freedom to be used for longer and more accurate strides. By adolescence and young adulthood, locomotion is mastered and full range of motion is achieved. Mature walkers swing their arms side to side and contralaterally. They also demonstrate pelvis rotation and knee flexion. As aging continues, older adults learn to compensate for their loss of balance and overall muscle weakness. They exhibit a narrower base of support, a narrower stance as their legs come closer together, their toes decrease their outward turn, and they use tools to increase their stability, such as walkers and canes.
So, how do we fix the problem? We propose to increase walking and gait efficiency that geriatric patients focus on strength. So, walking heel to toe as an exercise will be able to make their legs stronger, which enables them to walk without falling. Next would be endurance. Having daily physical activity will increase an individual's endurance daily, which will lead to having better efficiency while walking. Next is balance. Doing one leg stands as an exercise is a great way to increase the balance in elderly patients. Lastly, flexibility. Increasing the range of motion of knees and hips can be achieved by daily stretching, such as using yoga or similar activities that can increase an elderly patient's range of motion.
Hey y'all, can I tell y'all a joke?
Yeah.
How did the chicken cross the road?
Walk? That joke was terrible.
Well, just like group projects, good jokes are a joint effort.
And we are the gatekeepers. Today we're going to teach you guys about Stop!
Hey Emma, how did the chicken cross the road?
Then you gotta say why.
How did